Good day, everyone. We are the second group to report, and we welcome you to CSS, a guide to a successful web designing. So, first of all, what is CSS? What does it stand for, and what does it do? So, CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. It describes how HTML elements are to be placed on screen, paper, or in other media. It is a language for describing the presentation of web pages, including colors, layout, and fonts. CSS is independent of HTML and can be used with any XML-based markup language. So here, CSS allows one to adapt the presentation to different types of devices, such as large screens, small screens, or printers. The separation of HTML from CSS makes it easier to maintain sites, share style sheets across pages, and tailor pages to different environments. Now, to better understand CSS, we need to take note that in a web page there are three languages that is used. One of that is CSS and the other two is HTML and JavaScript. HTML, as we all know, provides the basic structure of sites, which is enhanced and modified by technologies like CSS and JavaScript. CSS is used to control presentation, formatting, and layout, as I've said earlier, and JavaScript is used to control the behavior of different elements of the site. Additionally, CSS is made to provide web developers with a standard way to define, apply, and manage sets of style characteristics. CSS specifies your document style page, layouts, colors, and fonts. Later, it will be discussed how CSS does this. So, why use CSS? Why do developers use CSS where in fact they can run a website without CSS? Now, the reason for that is that CSS saves a lot of work. CSS has convenience. This is because the style definitions are normally saved in an external .css files. With an external style sheet file, you can change the look of an entire website by just changing one file. This is made possible because of style sheets. Now think of style sheets as a preset to your web page. You have presets made with different themes and styles. With just one file of that style sheet, you can change the entire look of your web page. There are three ways of inserting a style sheet, namely external CSS, internal CSS, and inline CSS. For the external CSS, an external style sheet is used when the same style is applied to multiple pages. In order to change the style for all these pages, you only need to change the CSS syntax in the external style sheet. To link the style sheet, each page should contain the link tag included in the head section of the web page, shown in this example. Here, notice that we are in the head section of a web page. And as what you can see, we have inputted the link tag so that the browser will read the style definitions from the .css file and apply the formatting accordingly. Now for the internal CSS. An internal style sheet should be used when a single document has a unique style. Internal styles will be defined in the head section as well of the page by using the style tag. Here in our example, as what you can see, we're still inside the head section of our page, and unlike the external CSS, we use the style tag. Also here we have specified some things like the left margin to be 10 pixels, the background color to be yellow, and here below the declaration you can see that the style tag has already a slash. This indicates that we are closing the head section of the page. The browser will now read the style definitions and display the contents on the web page based on the formatting options listed in the style sheet. And lastly, the inline CSS. This method should be used when a style is to be applied to a single occurrence of an element in the web page. To use inline styles, you use the style attribute within the tag. The style attribute can contain any CSS property. Now in our example, it shows the syntax to change the color and left margin of a paragraph. Now to have a better overview of how CSS actually works, or more like how CSS contributes to a web page. Here is an example of a web page with CSS and without CSS.
Additional fact about CSS is that it solved a big problem. HTML was never intended to contain tags for formatting a web page. And please take notice, guys, that HTML was created to describe the content of your web page. Again, HTML was created to describe the content of your web page, like what you see in your heading and your body. When tags like font, color, and some other attributes were added to HTML specification, it started a nightmare for web developers, especially those developers who develop larger websites. Why it became a nightmare? Because fonts and color information were added to every single page, so it became a long and expensive process. So imagine if you are a web developer who develop larger websites, you really need to exert much more time and effort to add those attributes to every single page. So to solve this problem, the Worldwide Consortium created CSS. CSS now removed the style formatting from HTML, so it solved a big problem.
So how does CSS actually work? Bear in mind, guys, that this is just a very simplified version of what happens when a browser loads a web page, and that different browsers will handle the process in different ways. But this is roughly what happens. First thing first is that the browser loads the HTML. Then it converts the HTML into a DOM. DOM stands for Document Object Model. It is where your CSS and the document's content meet up. After that, the browser then fetches most of the resources that are linked to by the HTML document, such as embedded images and videos, and then linked CSS. The browser now parses the fetch CSS. The visual display of the page is shown on the screen. This stage is called painting. So I will show you guys how to apply CSS into the DOM. So let's say we added some CSS to our document to style it. So the HTML file is as follows. So you can see it, guys. I have here an example of CSS file. You can see that it is being separated from the file of HTML. So it is important to separate CSS from HTML because one obvious reason is that to avoid duplication and keeping the HTML purely semantic while letting CSS handle the styling. So let's suppose we apply the following CSS to it. The browser will parse the HTML and create a DOM from it, then parse the CSS. Since the only rule available in the CSS has a span selector, the browser will be able to sort the CSS very quickly. It will apply that rule to each one of the three span, then paint the final visual representation to the screen. So this is the final output, guys, from the HTML file and the CSS file that you just saw earlier.
CSS history, developed by www Consortium or www.w3c.org, the same organization that developed standard for HTML. Designed to augment HTML but not to replace it. A whole new way of formatting web pages. Provides several tools not available with standard HTML. Different versions of CSS. CSS1 was released on December 17, 1996, where font, text, color, background are added in the features. And CSS2 was released on 1988, where positioning, visual formatting are added in the features. CSS3 is the latest standard being developed on June 22, 1999, where color profiles, multi-column layout, and page media are added in the features. Hakon Wim Lai was the father of CSS. CSS was first proposed by him on October 10, 1994. At that time, Lai was working with Tim Berners-Lee at CERN.
Hello guys! Now that you know what is CSS, what's the use of it, and its history, let's now dive deeper on what do we need to use in order to use cascading style sheets, or commonly known as CSS. So, first is that you have to have a basic knowledge in HTML because they work hand in hand together. Web designing is like building a house. HTML is the foundation and CSS is the style to it. So what and who do you need when building a house? A carpenter and its tools, right? Code editors are like carpenters. So you have to find the right carpenter for you in order not to have problems building your house. And that's what I'm here for. Code editor. A source code editor is a text editor program designed specifically for editing source code of computer programs. It may be a standalone application, or it may be built into integrated development environment or web browser. So, there are a lot of source code editors out there, and picking one that is suited for you is a big help in designing your web. I'll be introducing to you the top 5 options for code editor according to the internet. And these are Sublime Text, Visual Studio Code Editor, Notepad++, Atom, and Brackets. Sublime Text is a proprietary cross-platform code editor initially released in 2008. Sublime Text offers a more traditional code editing experiences that emphasizes simplicity and ease of use. It is well known for being lightweight, speedy, and responsive. If performance is your top priority, Sublime Text loads, manages, and navigates large projects incredibly well. Sublime Text is free to download and start using, but for extended use, you'll need to shell out $80 for a license. Next, Visual Studio Code is a code editor developed by Microsoft and surprisingly open source software. Of the code editors in this list, it's probably the closest to being an IDE. It's very robust and is also one of the slower programs when starting up. It includes an integrated terminal, debugger, and source control, which supports Git by default. VS Code offers around 8,000 extensions owing to its fast-growing community of contributors to its ecosystem. Notepad++ removes many of the more complex features of the VS Code. It's far simpler, without too many bells and whistles, but lacks much of the elegance of other code editors. Notepad++ only supports close to 600 plugins, far behind the thousands of extensions offered by almost all other popular code editors, and lack easy-to-use marketplace. However, it is lightweight and fast. You'll notice feature limitations far before performance issues. To new users, Notepad++ is an easy-to-learn tool for your most basic text editing needs. Atom is an open source and developed by GitHub. In its initial development, it was heavily influenced by the new style of editor made popular by Sublime Text. However, there are key differences. Atom is free and open source and offers easy out-of-box integration with Git and GitHub. It has historically had performance and stability problems, but those have diminished significantly as it has matured. It's true that it still launches slower than some code editors, but it's just as reliable and quick to use as any of the rest after that. Brackets is an Adobe's open source editor and seems to be a very well-rounded software. It doesn't natively support as many languages for syntax highlighting as some of the others, but it still has quite a few. Because of its focus on front-end technologies, it also supports CSS preprocessors like LESS and SAS. Brackets doesn't come out on the top of many of the usual speed and reliability metrics, but it does have several unique features worth investigating. I hope you learned something from the previous video shown. Up next, is Renato Bolledo on demonstrating how to use CSS.
So now we have the CSS rules. Now when it comes to CSS rules, we only have two components. These are the selectors and the declarations. So when we say selectors, this one is actually where we can target tag names, IDs, classes, and many other things. We have here an example of a selector. As you can see, we have a hashtag header P. That is a selector, and inside the declaration and inside that curly braces we have what we called as declaration. Now we have another example here of selector is the comment div, and also we have here the li. Okay, so now we have the different selector with its explanation. So we have here the selector, an example of it, and the description of it. So in the first one we have a selector ID. So when it is actually a selector ID, then you actually need to use a hashtag to it. Okay, just always remember that if it's ID, if it's an ID selector, then you need to use hashtag. Now we have here an example. Okay, so an example here is that hashtag first name. So this one actually means that the hashtag here is the selector, which is the ID, and then we have here the ID name, which is first name. Okay, so now let's see the description of it. It selects the element with ID of first name. So basically the ID name here is first name, so all you need to do is to put hashtag to the ID's name. Okay, so now we have the next one. We have the selector class. Okay, so when it comes to class, it's actually not hashtag anymore. Okay, now you are now going to use period or dot. Okay, so if that one is looking, if he or she is using a class, then you should use a dot or a period. Now let's see an example of it. We have dot intro. Okay, so the description of it is that it selects all elements with class intro. So the class name is intro, so you're just going to put dot intro into the class name. Okay, and now we have the element dot class, where with the example of p dot intro. So the element here is the p, which that one is actually coming from the HTML. Okay, and we have now the class name, which is the intro. Okay, so when you are going to use this kind of selector, just always remember to put the dot if it's class after before the class name. Okay, so the description of this one is select only the p elements with class of intro. Okay, so the next one we have the universal selector. Okay, so when we say universal selector, this actually means that it selects all the elements, as simple as that one. Okay, and now we have here also the element selector. So an example of this one is the P, which is, we can see that one from the HTML. And now we have the description of it, that it selects all the P element. And we have also the element dot element. Okay, and the example of that one is div, comma, and then P. So the description of this one is actually it selects all the division elements and all of the P elements. Okay, so let's do a demo here when it comes to selectors. So let's create a file and let's save it and let's name it let's say try.html. Since we are going to do HTML, let's put .html as always when we are saving. So yeah, we have here now the basic syntax of HTML. We have the head and the body. So let's put a title to it, my title. Okay, And then let's go to the body of it. Now let's do the class one, the class selector. Okay, so let's put div with a class with the class name of all text. All right, and now inside this div we have an h1. So let's just put a sentence to it. Let's say, I really love you. Okay, now let's put also an h to do it, and let's put a sentence, but I don't love you. All right, and let's put also a paragraph. And now I'm just going to input a random text right now. Just don't mind all the text that I'm going to put here. So yeah, all of these things are just random. I'm just typing and typing and typing what's on my mind. Hurt so bad I did. Did it? I'm happy already. Just seriously, just don't mind my text right now. I'm just doing this one randomly. Okay, now let's do the last sentence of it. Happy as always, and be contented of what you have. All right, and now it's all done. Okay, now we have our paragraph here. And now let us create a new file, and that is now for our CSS. And let's name it try.css, because now we are now going to make the CSS. So let's put in a file name .css. And let's call our CSS now inside here, and let's type try.css so that we can connect our CSS to our HTML. So that is how you connect your CSS to your HTML. Okay, now so let's do the class first, okay? Since we are using class in the HTML. So as you can see, when it's about class, we actually need to use period or dot. So that's just how it goes. So let's use dot. And now we are going to put now the class name that we put it, which is all text. Okay. All text. All right. Now let's do a little bit of declaration. Let's put our font family, which is our property here. And let's put the value of it as a sans serif. Okay. And now let's add also a background color to it, and let's put a value of navy. Okay, then let's add also a color to our text, and let's put a value of red. Okay, so our declaration is good now. So now let's actually save it all, and now we can actually, let's try to view it now. Let's go to our folder where we save all of it, and just click the HTML mouse to of it, and then open with, and you can actually open it in different kind of browser. Let's try Google Chrome. And now this is what the result is. Combining our HTML and CSS, we have the division of this thing, the blue color. We have the H1, H2, and paragraph. So yeah, that's just how it really goes. And then yes, you can see now we have here the div. Inside the div we have an H1, an H2, and a paragraph. Same thing as the browser. And now let's add a text align and put it in the center so that we can it is really pleasing to the eye. And there it goes. Now it's more attractive. Okay. And yeah, so far that's it. And oh yeah, let's try if we use an ID selector now. If we are now going to use an ID selector, it should be an hashtag. It's not a dot or a period, it's an hashtag, okay? So let's use hashtag to it, and then the ID name of it. Let's save it all, and now let's look at our browser and reload it. And yeah, so far same result. Let's change something here in our background color. Let's try, let's put the value yellow, okay. So let's save all of it, and then let's reload, and there you go, it works. Now let's try if we are going to put a dot in an ID selector, that is an invalid one. So let's try if it works. See, it doesn't work. The CSS won't work because ID doesn't it ID should be hashtag, it should not be dot. Okay, all right, let's put it in the hashtag way, and now it will work again. That's just really how it goes when it comes to selectors. Okay, so we have another demo here, and now we are going to demo the selector element.class and the universal selector. Okay, so we have here the last code we did. Now let's delete this division here. Okay, let's adjust. Let's delete this one. Okay, now this one is okay now, and let's put something in the paragraph element. Okay, so let's put a class with the class name intro. Okay, so there we go, we have the element P with the class of intro. Okay, so let's go to the CSS. Now let's call the element, which is the P. Okay, so there we go, we call it already. Now let's put a dot or a period to it, since we are using a class selector. Okay, so always remember that one. And then let's put the class name, which is intro. And there you go, you already called it. So that's already good to go. And now let's put a little bit of declaration. Okay, so let's put a font family to it with a value of sans serif. And then what else? Let's put a background color to it. Okay, so let's put it in yellow, and the color of it, let's put it in red. Okay, so now let's save all it. All right, save all. And now let's go ahead to the file so that we can look at the result. Okay, that's not the result, let's X that one. Okay, so here we have the file, and now let's open it. And here you go, this is the result already. So far, the only thing that has changes is the element P. Okay, so that is just how you call, or that is just how you used a selector. So now let's go now to the next one. Okay, we have now the, okay, wait, let's delete this one. Okay, so now let's go to the universal selector. So we all know that universal selector select all the elements. Okay, so now let's put a declaration here. Let's say font family, sans serif. And as you can see here, the font is not a sans serif. So if you reload that one, that font will change. Okay, so let's save it. Save. Now let's reload it. And there you go. As you can see now, the font changes all of it from H1 to H2 to paragraph. It all changed because the universal selector is where it selects all the elements. Okay, so we have now the last selectors. We have the element and the element comma element selectors. Okay, so we have our old code here. So far this one is okay. Alright, so let's call this element P here, which is the paragraph in our CSS. So we have now the selector P, which is a selector element also. Okay, so that's okay already, and now let's do a little declaration to it. Let's put the color, and then the value is green. Let's save all, and then let's save. And now let's look at the result of it. there it goes. Okay, and here it is. Okay, so as you can see, the paragraph element became green. The text became green because you change it to green. You call the element P, and then you put a declaration to it that that the color of the text should turn into green. So that's just how it works. Okay, so now let's go to the element, comma element. So let's adjust this one and let's add a div element. Okay. Okay, so here we go. Let's do this one. Let's put it under here. Okay, now that's good. Let's add another div below, another division below. Okay, and a paragraph also. Let's put the paragraph to it, and let's copy paste this one. Okay, so there we go. Now let's go to our CSS. Okay, so we are going to call an element, comma element. So we're going to call two elements here. Let's delete this one. Okay, so we call the div first, the two div. Oh yeah, that's actually the div. And then comma, and then you're going to call now the P element. Okay, and there we go. And now let's put a little declaration to it. Same thing also. Let's just use the color of the text and the value of it with a color blue. Okay, so now let's save all, and now let's look at the result. And now, as you can see, all of it turned into blue. Why? Because we did call the division, and inside the div we have the h1, the h2, and the paragraph. Okay, so that one, all of those elements inside the division will turn into blue. And also we called the element P, which means that all the element P will turn into color blue. So that's just how it works. Okay, so we call the element P, and then it will turn to blue. And that's why it turned all into blue. So yeah, that's it so far. Thank you.
Develop larger website.